Okay, this video is book review part 2 of Dr. Mcdougall's book, The Starch Solution, and we're now in the section about talking about the epidemiology and the starches. So this is chapter 2 of his book, and here's a very nice illustration, and here's his point. This is what Dr. Mcdougall said. He said, all long-term healthy populations eat a starch-based diet. There are no exceptions. And the people of, let's say, Central America, South America were called the people of the corn. In the Asian areas, they primarily ate rice, especially white rice in the recent decades. Okinawans also ate sweet potatoes. Papua New Guinea ate sweet potatoes. The Mayans and the Aztecs were the ones that were known as the people of the corn. The Incas of South America ate potatoes and quinoa. Ancient Egyptians ate wheat. The gladiators were called the barley men, okay? And again, Dr. Mcdougall's quote, starch has unlocked the door to good health for thousands of my patients. And one of the reasons why Dr. Mcdougall is the best doctor in the world is because he gave people a systematic way to understand health. I'll show you a couple more pictures of epidemiology, and then I'll explain a little bit more why this is such a powerful thing. First of all, you're going to run into people who try to debate the vegan diet or try to tell you high fat is good, or they're going to try to tell you, you know, paleo, keto, carnivore, all that nonsense is good. And what I'm trying to do here is give you the systematic information so that you'll have no problem in refuting them and knowing what's best for yourself, okay? So, and also, why do I say Mcdougall's the best? He cured more patients than any other doctor. You know, Kempner saw a lot of patients in his clinic and did a fantastic job, but, you know, Mcdougall also with his videos, with his books, and he put more time into educating his patients than Kempner did. Don't get me wrong, Kempner had fantastic, awesome results, but I think it's pretty clear that Mcdougall did a lot more to educate his patients and to empower them so they get long-term great results, not just great results initially. Okay, so what's his main point? He says you eat starch. So the question is, well, why do you eat starch? And he points out, and I put the page numbers in here. So if you want to refer to his book, Starch Solution, here's the page numbers. Starches, they're the best way to satisfy hunger. What we talked about with my review of this book, part 1. I'm going to do it in different parts. They taste good. They're referred to as comfort foods because they taste good and they satisfy your hunger. They're very low in fat, so you avoid the atherosclerosis, diabetes, hypertension diseases. They store well. You can keep them for a long time. They put them in unrefrigerated bins at the grocery store. They're cheap. That's good as well. They're the healthiest food. And they tend to not store up toxic chemicals like animal foods tend to do. Potatoes and sweet potatoes are complete foods. They contain all the nutrients you could want except for vitamin B12. There's been people who've only eaten potatoes for months on end and come out of it healthier than ever. Grains and legumes, beans are almost complete. They're a little low in vitamin A and C, but you just eat a little bit of fruits and vegetables and you get that. The only thing I take, by the way, is vitamin B12 besides eating a low-fat vegan diet. Epidemiology shows that the low-fat vegan diet is the healthiest one. All the long-term healthy populations eat low-fat plant-based diets. Okay. Migration studies show they're the best. Like when you have people migrating in, let's say from Japan or from other countries, the more they move away from traditional low-fat, plant-based, starch-based diets, the fatter and sicker they get. So it's not a genetic thing of one population, this or that. All populations of humans, as they move towards high-fat diets, they get fat and sick. There was a cardiologist by the name of William Roberts who did research on atherosclerosis, and he said, you know, all herbivores, you feed them a high-fat diet, they become fat because they're not made for that diet. Okay, then you look at the research of, you know, Dr. Kempner, Burkitt, Blankenhorn, Pritikin, Campbell, Swank, and others. It all shows that low-fat, plant-based diet is the healthiest diet. There's no ambiguity about it, okay? Longevity studies show it's the best. Like the Seventh-day Adventist study has the longest lived patients of any longevity studies. The women were about 89.3 years. The men were something like about 86 years. All right, comparative anatomy. Chimpanzees are almost purely vegetarian. I know they'll eat small monkeys, and chimpanzees are very poorly behaved compared to us. They eat more of a fruit-based diet than humans do. People eat more starch, and he said there's genetic reasons to confirm that. One thing I disagree with him a little bit, though. He said the DNA of humans and chimps is almost identical. there's a lot of overlap in the functional genes, as you would expect. We have a lot of overlap with every other living creature on the planet with regard to things like glycolysis and all that. But there's a tremendous difference in the regulatory DNA, which previously was called junk DNA, between humans and chimps. Humans are far superior to chimps. We have a brain, a cerebral cortex, like 3 times the size of theirs. Chimps can't even count, okay? And I just want to make that point because all the science books, in my opinion, are sort of based on what I would consider, they try to say that humans and chimps are more alike us than they are. So I'm not going to get into that anymore, but I'm just telling you, I've made separate videos on this subject. We're much more different from chimps than is widely recognized. Okay, next thing. Starches are a readily available food, meaning that they would be available in abundant calories to our ancestors, because there's also some paleo keto proponents who try to say we needed meat for brain development. That's completely untrue. My brain functions as well as ever, better than it did previously, now that I'm 100% vegan for years. Okay, military histories. If you read military histories like of Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Julius Caesar, the gladiators, they fought best when eating a plant-based diet. If you look at paleontology studies, like the Egyptian mummies, they were only the rich people got to be made into mummies and buried in the pyramids and stuff. They would have all of what you would expect from eating high-fat diets. And based on their hieroglyphics and other records, it appears they probably ate about a 50% fat diet with a lot of animal foods. And so the Egyptian mummies have what you would expect from that type of diet. They have atherosclerosis with calcifications in their aortic arch from atherosclerosis. They have a lot of gallstones, again, because you get excessive cholesterol precipitating in the gallbladder. 95% of gallstones are cholesterol gallstones. They had evidence of obesity. And that sort of thing is seen in other paleontology studies. If you look at the European aristocrats, they dug up graveyards in Europe, and they found that the ones from the aristocrats, people eating high-fat diets, they had more dish of their spine, diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis, which goes with degenerative disc disease of the spine, which goes with atherosclerosis of the spine. Compared to the peasants, who are eating turnips, they don't have so much of that. He also did a pretty extensive review of even more ancient paleontology, where they would find starch grains in the teeth of ancient human ancestors. Okay, even the Neanderthals. Okay, Dr. Mcdougall's own personal experience with himself, his family, and his patients shows that it worked best. So I'm going through all this to let you know you should feel solid in a low-fat, plant-based diet. Okay, that's important to know, and there's no ambiguity about it. It's obvious. And then you say, well, why do you hear endless conflicting information on the internet? Because that's how you make money. They have to tell you you're deficient in something. Oh, you're deficient in, whatever. Probiotics. You're deficient in some vitamin. Because that way they can sell it to you. You're deficient in omega-3s. They'll spend a tremendous amount of effort to convince you of that. Okay, what I'm trying to do is empower you, okay? Give you a chance to be healthy and not be a chump and not be dependent on all of them. All right, so here's just a little bit about epidemiology. And these are my own slides. This is stuff, so I'm giving you an overview of the book, but every once in a while I'll throw in my own slides because I think they illustrate the point well. And I'm also trying to help you have a systematic, solid understanding of this so you can't be chumped. Okay, because most people get chumped. And like I said, too, I don't think Mcdougall's diet had anything to do with his death, just so you know. It was some type of abrupt event. It was not a vegan diet thing, is my impression. Not that I know exactly what happened. I don't. But from my study of it, that's my impression at this point. Okay, this is the northern Mexico. This population here is called the Tarahumara, means fleet of foot runners. They live in the Sierra Madre Mountains. Sierra means like a saw in Spanish, so the mountaintops are like a saw. Copper Canyon area, and they're world famous for being long-distance ultramarathon runners. Okay, they were combined with a population called the Pima in northern Mexico, but in the Mexican-American War, 1848, these populations became separated, and the Pima were displaced into what is now called Arizona. Now, the Pima have eaten, they've taken on the standard American diet, and it shows in their health. Their health is a disaster. They have tremendously high rates of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and they get all the typical Western diseases, okay? Open heart surgery, cabbage, coronary bypass graft, midline sternotomy, so they get access to the heart to bypass the coronaries. Right upper quadrant, gallstone surgery for gallbladder. Right lower quadrant, appendicitis. Left lower quadrant, sigmoiditis. Sigmoid resection for diverticulitis. Cardiac pacemaker. Left neck, thyroidectomy. Below the knee amputation from diabetes. Okay, they're a disaster. Their health is a disaster. Okay, look at the Tarahumara. I call it TBE, total body energy. They're running ultra marathons. Nathan Pritikin was so impressed by them, he patterned his diet after them. All right. Caldwell Esselstyn was impressed by them as well, and he's actually, I think, friends, and so is T. Colin Campbell with a guy named O'Connor. I think it's Bill O'Connor, who did a lot of research on the Tarahumara. So I mean, this is basically your choice. You can be smart and have high energy, or you can be a chump. So they eat a plant-based diet here. I got a little more information about the Tarahumara for you. And I'm also showing you this not just specifically about the Tarahumara, but because this is just the way it is. Lots of people, once they go low-fat vegan, they start running marathons. Look at that guy, Garth Davis, a real smart doctor from Texas, a bariatric surgeon. There's lots of people who that happens to, okay? All right, the Pima ate the sad diet. Let's see, Tarahumara. Ruth Heidrich, the great marathoner triathlete lady who survived metastatic breast cancer for decades and decades. She's still alive. She went out and visited the Tarahumara. Other famous, I think it was Scott Urich, famous ultramarathoners have gone out and visited the Tarahumara. They're for real. Okay, this guy, Christopher Mcdougall, is not related to John Mcdougall, that as far as I'm aware of. He wrote a book called in 2009 called Born to Run, bestseller. It was a good book. I read the book. The Tarahumara, they don't have any hypertension. Even the old people have normal blood pressure. There's no obesity. They said not a single guy was fat. They have no coronary artery disease. Their average cholesterol was 136. Their diet comes out to being 75% protein. No, 75% carbohydrate. 75% carbohydrate. Protein was 13% and fat was about 12%. The Tarahumara ate mostly corn as the major source of their calories, what you'd kind of expect from Mexico, the people of the corn. They also ate beans, squash, and local greens. They don't have cars. They walk and run just about everywhere. Okay. And some people have asked me, oh, well, they don't always live that long. Yeah, because they kind of get brutalized by some of the very harsh populations that live around them. Okay. But their health was extraordinary. Okay, more epidemiology. This is just the Yanomamo. They live in South America, sort of at the junction of Venezuela and Brazil in the Amazon jungle. And they eat a plant-based diet. They don't add any salt to their food. There's no salt shakers in the jungle. They probably eat about 200 milligrams of sodium today. They don't have any hypertension. Because I just show you that because in the United States, most people are hypertensive, after 50, and even a lot of people are hypertensive in their 40s. There's more hypertension than you would think in the 30s. Okay, because they're eating high-fat, high-sodium diet. In Kenya, they eat a diet of fruits, a plant-based diet, a lot of starches, and they'll have normal blood pressure for life. So there's a real famous study. It's from the Lancet Journal in 1929. The author's name is Donison. 1,800 consecutive admissions to a hospital in Kenya. And what percentage of patients were hypertensive? 0. What do you think it would be if it was done in the United States, a bunch of black patients? Hypertension off the charts, okay? And there's another guy by the name of Richard Moore. He studied hypertension in blacks, and he said it's not because of the sodium sensitivity. It's because they don't eat enough potassium. Where does potassium come from? Potassium comes from plants. P for plants, P for potassium. It's a vasodilator. Magnesium also comes from plants. It's a vasodilator, okay? So I'm letting you know this because all the good stuff is in the plants. It's got the potassium. It's got the magnesium. It's got the nitrates, precursors to nitric oxide, and it's got the fiber. Fiber protects you so you don't get leaky gut. Fiber also maintains your blood-brain barrier so you're smart. And it's also got all the antioxidants to prevent oxidative stress. And by being low-fat, you maximize oxygen and glucose delivery to your tissues. It's all good. It's what you want. Okay, one thing that's just a little bit funny is a lot of people say, well, where are you going to get your calcium if you eat a plant-based diet? You don't need to worry about it. You get more than enough calcium. As Dr. Mcdougall has described in numerous lectures, it's impossible to be too low in calcium. It just doesn't happen. And the Bantu women in South Africa are kind of a famous example of it. They would typically have 9 or 10 children. They would typically nurse the children 2 to 4 years. And they would eat very little calcium during the day, much less than your typical American woman. And they don't have any osteoporosis problems, despite nursing all these kids. So that's the point. The calcium is not the issue, okay? Little more epidemiology. I'm just trying, and I'm telling you, it's always like this. Look at it this way. Conventional medicine, when they treat chronic disease, they always lose. They always fail. They never, ever cure it. The patient has to take the pills for their entire life. Versus when you come to looking at epidemiology and health studies, the low-fat vegans, they always win. They're always the healthiest people. Okay, look at the Seventh-day Adventist studies. The more vegan they are, the healthier they are. And those aren't even necessarily low-fat vegans. But you go low-fat vegan, you get even healthier. Okay, Okinawa. They had 5 times as many centenarians as the USA overall. Their diet at that time was about 70% of their calories from sweet potatoes. It was very low in salt, unlike mainland Japan. I think that's why the Okinawans were healthier. So here's Japan. Here's Japan. Okinawa is kind of like what Hawaii is to the United States. It's kind of like what Okinawa is to Japan. They venerated their ancestors. That was sort of part of their religion. They ate lots of greens. The families were close, tight-knit communities. They ate an 80-10-10 diet, so that's about 80% of calories from carbohydrate, 10% from fat, 10% from protein. Average age of death in the women was about 86 years old, which is the second best ever, other than the Seventh-day Adventists that I referred to a little earlier ago. And this one, it says females 88.6 years. Maybe it was 88.6 instead of 89.6. I thought it was 89.6 years. Anyways, that's pretty extraordinary. And the men, 85.3. Okay, so this is for the Loma Linda Seventh-day Adventist vegans. Okay, so it's pretty extraordinary. Much longer than the average Californian of that time. And Japan migrant studies, like I said, as soon as they migrate to Hawaii, they start getting fatter and sicker. And by the time they get to California, they're even more fatter and sicker, with the old ones who stuck to more of the rice-based diet being skinnier, as Dr. Mcdougall referred to in the previous chapter. And then the children fatter and sicker, and then the kids even fatter and sicker than that. And here's Loma Linda. It's a suburb of Los Angeles in California. Okay, because yeah, if you look at the arguments of the paleo-ketos, there's a lot of bluster, a lot of emotion, a lot of games trying to refute statistical approaches, but they don't have anything to offer. They really don't. Okay, Norway is the area where they had lots of dairy. The people were real fat and sick. Roy Swank did some interesting work there when he looked at Norway. What he found was the persons in the coastal areas where they ate less dairy, they were much healthier, much less MS. In the center of Norway, where they ate a lot more, so here's Norway, by the way, where they ate a lot more dairy, they had much more multiple sclerosis. So the reason that's relevant is some people would say, well, you have more autoimmune disease the further north you go away from the equator, and that's because of vitamin D from the sunshine. And what Roy Swank said is, no, it's not the sunshine issue, because the latitude of the coastal areas of Norway versus the center of Norway, they're not that different. So it's not just the vitamin D. You know, it's good to get your sunshine, get your vitamin D, but the point Roy Swank was making is it's the diet, because as people go more north, they tend to eat more animal food. So in general, the more north you go, the more diseases you see related to eating an animal food diet, which means all the high-fat diseases, you know, Western diseases, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, atherosclerosis, coronary artery disease, impotence, for example. But Swank really strongly came down that the key thing is the diet, more so than the sunshine. Okay, there's also an advantage when you're near the equator. There's a lot more fruits available just because you got sunshine all year round. It was also shown during World War II, when people were rationed off of meat and dairy, they had a dramatic drop in their cardiovascular mortality. And that also showed, the World War II rationing, that the food was more important than the psychological stress. Because those people, you know, they're refugees. They're very psychologically stressed out. But they still had better health than a low-stress meat eater. Okay. Let's see. The next thing was what happened in Finland. Finland, around 1970, they noticed that they had tremendously high cardiovascular mortality, death from heart disease, for example, and strokes. And they decided to do something about it. They hired this one doctor named Pekka Puska, and he led what is called the Karelia Project. Karelia is a province in Finland. And he got the people to stop smoking in general, to eat much less meat and dairy. They even switched out some of their salt shakers to potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride. They taught the wives more about nutrition. Typically, the men would work and the women would cook and, you know, raise the children. And they got them to eat more frozen berries all year round. So that way they would eat more, during the winter too. And they had a 84% drop in cardiovascular mortality. That's incredible. An 84% drop in cardiovascular mortality. It just shows you how powerful all this stuff is. Okay, their blood pressure improved, etc. Increased longevity, they're healthier. Okay, so when did people start becoming fat and sick? Because, traditionally people tended to most people were poor, most people ate plant foods, so most people were thin and didn't get these typical Western diseases. It really started ramping up after the time of the Industrial Revolution, like in the 1800s, because more money was available and meat was more widely available, and it just kept getting worse because refrigeration started becoming available once electricity became available. They also put a lot of food, salt on food, animal food, meat to store it, and it just makes you sick. So, a great quote of Dr. Mcdougall is, "The fat you eat is the fat you wear." You want to remember that one. The fat you eat is the fat you wear. So the more fat you eat, and I don't care what type of fat it is, it increases the likelihood you're going to be fat, sick, and diabetic. And I think all these fats are bad, just so you know. When you eat more, and what I'm saying here agrees with what Dr. Mcdougall says, if you eat more omega-3s, you put yourself at risk to be immunosuppressed. And in animal studies, that showed increased risk of cancer. It's also showed increased risk of prostate cancer. So that's the great legacy that Dr. Mcdougall has given, amongst other things, was a systematic way to view nutrition based on the history, the epidemiology, the comparative anatomy, the paleontology studies, personal experience, taking care of patients, and the research. So it's solid. It's there. So don't let yourself be tricked away from that. And test it out on yourself. All you have to do is eat low-fat vegan for a couple months and check your blood labs. I think you'll be amazed at how good they are. If you are taking any medicines for diabetes, especially for hypertension, or for blood thinners, you need to work with your doctor to titrate all your dosages, because once you start eating healthier, you're probably going to significantly decrease your dosages of those medications. And it would be dangerous to take your old medications when you're eating this new diet, because you could drop your pressure too low, you could drop your sugars too low. So you need to work with your doctor to titrate those medicines.